They say the sea never forgets. It remembers every tear that falls into it, every chain that sinks to its floor, every name that was lost before it could be written down. For centuries, the Indian Ocean has carried stories of spice and sorrow. Ships came with scent of cloves and left with the stench of blood. To the world, Zanzibar was a paradise of trade and fragrance, but beneath its turquoise waters and coral walls, it was also one of humanity's darkest harbors. This is the story of Zanzibar, the Dark Spice Isle, a story of wealth built on bondage, of sultans and merchants, missionaries and monarchs, of the thousands who vanished into the tides and the few who lived to tell their names. Long before the word Zanzibar became synonymous with beauty, it was simply a dot in the ocean off the coast of East Africa. Its people fished, farmed and traded ivory, salt, and clothes with their mainland neighbors. The monsoon winds that blew from Arabia and India brought more than goods. They brought visitors, Arabs, Persians and Indians who anchored their doors along its shores in search of trade and eventually control. By the 10th century, small coastal settlements like Kewa, Pemba, and Unguja had become vibrant parts in what historians would later call the Swahili coast. Here, Africans and Arab cultures intertwined to form a new identity, the Swahili people. They spoke Kiswahili, built coral stone towns, and practiced Islam. For a time, the exchange was mutual: cloth for gold, ivory for beads, friendship for faith. But as the centuries turned, trade in goods would slowly give way to a darker commerce, the trade in people. By the 15th century, the demand for enslaved labor across the Islamic world was rising. Zanzibar, sitting at the crossroads of Africa and Arabia, became the perfect waypoint. Caravans from the interior of modern-day Tanzania, Mozambique, Congo, and Malawi brought captives in chains to the coast. From there, Arab and Swahili merchants shipped them to the parts of Muscat, Basra, and Bombay. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to arrive. In 1498, Vasco da Gama's expedition anchored off Zanzibar shores, marking the beginning of European intrusion into the Indian Ocean trade. The Portuguese crown soon seized key ports, imposing tributes and naval patrols. But unlike in West Africa, Portugal's presence in the east was thin. They taxed, bullied and burned, yet never truly ruled. When their empire waned in the 1600s, the Omani Arabs stepped in, and with them came the full machinery of organized slavery. In 1698, after years of warfare, the Omani Yarubi dynasty expelled the Portuguese from Mombasa and Zanzibar. Under the new rulers, the island entered its golden and bloodiest age. By the early 1800s, Sultan Said bin Sultan al-Busaidi moved his royal court from Muscat to Zanzibar, making it the capital of a maritime empire. The island's wealth now rested on two commodities: cloves and slaves. The Sultan imported thousands of date palms and clove seedlings, transforming the humid soil into vast plantations. But the land demanded labor, and that labor was drawn from the mainland. Every harvest of spice required a harvest of human beings. By 1840, tens of thousands of enslaved Africans were being marched from the interior to coastal markets such as Bagamoyo and Kewa. Those who survived the trek were packed into dhows bound for Zanzibar. Some were resold to Arabia, Persia, or the French islands of the Indian Ocean. Others were kept on the island, to work the Sultan's estates. The mathematics of the trade were ruthless. A healthy young man bought into Bara for 10 yards of clothes could fetch 300 rupees in Zanzibar. A single shipload of 100 captives could buy a year's worth of spices. Human life became a line item in an accountant's ledger. The beating of this system was the slave market at Stone Town. Located on a hill overlooking the sea, it bustled with buyers from Oman, Persia, and the Comoros. Auctions took place every day except Fridays. Men, women, and children stood in rows, inspected for teeth and scars, then sold to the highest bidder. Behind the market were two low cellars, damp chambers with barely enough space to stand. Here, the enslaved were chained and held for days before sale. The air was thick with sweat, urine, and seawater. Those who died waiting were dragged out and buried in shallow graves near the shore. In the early 1860s, eyewitnesses like the missionary Dr. David Livingstone described seeing hundreds in irons waiting to be shipped, and called Zanzibar the focal point of the East African slave trade. By some estimates, as many as 50,000 Africans passed through its markets each year at the height of the trade. To understand Zanzibar's slave economy is to understand a web of shared guilt. Arab merchants financed expeditions into the interior. African chiefs and warlords supplied captives in exchange for guns, clothes, and beads. Indian financiers provided credit and ships. European powers purchased ivory and cloves, knowing fully well the labor that produced them. The trade turned Zanzibar into the richest island on the coast. Its harbor was a forest of mats. Its bazaars overflowed with silks, silver, and spice. But for every merchant who grew wealthy, 100 captives perished on the march or at sea. Among the island's elites, slavery was not hidden, it was celebrated. Owning slaves was a sign of prestige. Large households kept dozens as servants, porters, and concubines. The Sultan himself was one of the biggest slave owners in the region, possessing more than 20,000 acres of plantation land. Yet, beneath the prosperity, tensions simmered. The enslaved came from dozens of ethnic groups: Yao, Makonde, Inyamwezi, Manyama, each with its own language and customs. Some attempted escape, others revolted. The most famous of these uprisings occurred in 1873 on Pemba Island, where hundreds rose against their masters. The rebellion was swiftly crushed, its leaders executed in the town square. Even among free Africans, resentment towards Arab dominance was growing. While intermarriage had created a mixed Swahili aristocracy, color and origin still dictated status. The word Mwafrika, African, was often used as an insult, a reminder of servitude. Freedom itself had shades. When British ships began to appear off the coast in the early 1800s, they came under the banner of morality. In 1807, Britain had abolished the Atlantic slave trade and now sought to police the world's oceans. But its motives were never purely humanitarian. Britain's navy wanted dominance over Indian Ocean routes. Its merchants wanted control of the spice trade. In 1822, the British consul Captain Mosby signed the Mosby Treaty with Sultan Said, prohibiting the sale of slaves to Christian nations. It sounded noble, but changed little. The trade simply shifted eastward to Arab buyers, where British law held no sway. By 1845, another agreement, the Hamilton Treaty, banned the export of slaves by sea from Zanzibar, yet overland caravans continued unhindered. Publicly, London applauded itself for moral leadership. Privately, British companies continued to buy ivory and cloves produced by enslaved labor. Freedom was good for speeches. Profits was better for business. Throughout the 1850s and the 1860s, British consuls in Zanzibar sent reports back to London filled with contradictions. They condemned slavery yet warned that ending it too quickly would collapse the economy. They urged the Sultan to reform but promised him British protection if he kept the peace. The abolitionist conscience was constantly balanced against imperial convenience. When Sultan Said died in 1856, his sons quarreled over succession. Britain intervened, backing Bagash bin Said, who seemed more pliant. Under diplomatic pressure and the occasional naval bombardment, Bagash finally signed the Anglo-Zanzibar Treaty in 1873, officially closing the slave market. The same year, British Marines marched into Stone Town and shut down the auction sheds. The underground chambers were emptied, and in their place, a church was built by British missionaries. Its altar now stands where the wiping post once stood. The world applauded the end of the trade, but the truth was far messier, because the market had closed, not the system. Slavery itself continued quietly on plantations from decades to come. Masters called their slaves servants. Contracts were forged. Chains were replaced by debt. And while London declared victory for humanity, the profits of clove exports continued to fill British warehouses. Zanzibar had entered a new age, not of freedom, but of disguise. The island that once sold people by the hundreds now sold the story of its redemption. Its whitewashed walls gleamed brighter than ever, even as the shadows beneath them deepened. The British flag flew above the harbor, and missionaries prayed where traders once bargained. But for the thousands still bound by invisible chains, little had changed. The world had abolished the slave trade in bodies, yet it had kept the trade in lies. Freedom is never as sudden as the signing of a treaty. It does not arrive in a day. It seeps slowly like the tide, washing away old footprints, leaving new ones half-formed in the sand. When the guns fell silent in 1873 and the market in Stone Town was declared closed, the world congratulated itself. But freedom in Zanzibar was a performance for the audience of Europe. Behind the curtains, the plantation bells still rang at dawn. The Abolition Treaty outlawed the sale of slaves, not their possession. The Sultan's decree forbade public markets but permitted domestic service. And so the language changed, but the labor did not. Those once called slaves were now called Raya wa Nyumbani, people of the house. They lived in the same huts, worked the same fields, and bowed to the same masters. Only the paperwork had changed. On the clove plantations of Pemba and Unguja, labor gangs still cleared the soil under the supervision of Arab overseers. The British consuls knew this. Their reports spoke of lingering servitude, yet London looked the other way. To truly enforce abolition would mean dismantling the island's entire economy, and that was a price neither the Sultan nor the British partners were willing to pay. For the next 40 years, Zanzibar's prosperity continued to rest on coerced labor thinly veiled as apprenticeship. By 1900, nearly a third of the island's population were still bound to masters, working without pay. Their chains were now invisible, made of law and dependence. In 1890, the British formally declared Zanzibar a protectorate. The The Sultan remained on his throne, but real power shifted to the British Consul General. Under this new order, abolition became not just a policy but a public relations tool. The empire could parade Zanzibar as proof of its civilizing mission. Meanwhile, the same British firms exported cloves, copra and ivory worth millions from the island each year. They preached salvation while counting profits. Mission schools were built beside the old slave chambers. African children learned to sing hymns in English while their parents still labored on estates. Freedom had become an institution, managed, taught, and measured by those who had once profited from its absence. For those who had lived through bondage, the years after abolition were an age of uncertainty. Many former slaves with nowhere to go remained on the estates. Others drifted into Stone Town, forming new communities on the margins: fishermen, potters, and small traders. A few sought refuge in the Christian missions where they were baptized, renamed, and taught trades. Among them were the descendants of the Yao, Makoa, and Inyamwezi people, whose ancestors had once been marched in chains through the markets. To them, the church on the hill, the one built over the slave market, was both a sanctuary and a scar. Freedom meant survival, not equality. Arab families still owned the land, Indian merchants still held the credit, and Africans once enslaved remained the island's laboring class. This hierarchy had survived abolition, only its vocabulary had evolved. By the early 20th century, Britain had made Zanzibar a showcase of its colonial virtue. The slave market had become a tourist curiosity, the church that replaced it a monument to progress. But in the hinterlands of East Africa, British and German colonies were building railways with forced African labor. The empire had simply changed geography, not conscience. Reports from the Congo, Kenya, and Tanganyika revealed similar patterns. Africans recruited under duress, villages punished for refusing quotas, chiefs coerced into supplying men for public works. The same Europe that had condemned Arab slavery now practiced its own forms of coercion under the name of civilization. It was a familiar hypocrisy. Britain's abolitionist rhetoric polished its global image as its colonies thrived on exploitative economies. Freedom was exported as a slogan. Control remained the product. As the 20th century advanced, the clove plantations that had made Zanzibar rich began to wither. Cyclones, soil exhaustion, and falling prices in global markets eroded the fortunes of the island elites. By the 1930s, economic depression hit the archipelago hard. Tensions between the Arab landowners and the African laborers deepened. When the Second World War ended, Britain faced growing pressure to decolonize. Across Africa, independence movements were rising. In Zanzibar, African political parties began demanding land reform and equal rights. The memory of bondage still burned beneath the surface. Freedom had been declared once before this time. They wanted it to be real. On the night of January 12, 1964, revolution erupted. African rebels led by John Okello, many descendants from those once enslaved, overthrew the Arab-dominated government. The uprising was swift and brutal. Hundreds of Arabs and Indians were killed or expelled. For the first time in centuries, political power on the island shifted decisively into African hands. It was a reckoning, violent, chaotic, and long delayed. The ghost of the slave market had returned, demanding recognition. Zanzibar soon merged with mainland Tanganyika to form the modern nation of Tanzania. But even as a new flag rose, old wounds lingered. Today, Stone Town stands quiet under the same tropical sun. Tourists wander through narrow alleys of coral stone and carved doors, their cameras tracing beauty but not pain. They pass St. Monica's Church, built where bodies were once sold, and descend into the dark chambers beneath it. There, the air remains heavy, the walls damp with history. Chains still hang from the stones, preserved as relics of horror and warning. Guides speak softly, their words mixing fact with reverence. They point to the carved memorial outside, a circle of human figures bound together by stone ropes, half buried in the earth. It is not just sculpture, it is testimony. Each year, descendants of those enslaved return to Zanzibar to pay homage. Ceremonies blend African drumming with Islamic prayers and Christian hymns, an echo of the island's layered identity. No single language is enough to mourn what happened here. The legacy of the Zanzibar slave trade stretches far beyond the island shores. It shaped cultures of Oman, Yemen, and the Comoros. It left African bloodlines scattered across Arabia and South Asia. It built fortunes in London, Bombay, and Muscat, and it carved deep divisions between Africans and Arab that still shadow East African politics today. But it also bettered resilience. From the fusion of peoples came the Swahili language, music, and the architecture that defined the coast. Tragedy created culture. Pain produced poetry. Zanzibar became both wound and wisdom, a reminder of how deeply intertwined suffering and beauty can be. In recent years, efforts to preserve and teach this history have grown. The old slave market, once erased from memory, is now part of UNESCO's World Heritage Site. Schools teach its story, museums display its relics. And yet, for many, the silence still outweighs the knowledge. History here is not just about remembrance, it is about responsibility. The greatest danger is not that the world remembers the wrong things, it is that it forgets too easily. When memory fades, injustice repeats itself in new forms, under new names. The clove plantations are now tourist gardens. The harbors welcome cruise ships instead of slave dolls. But the imbalance that slavery created of wealth and poverty, of privilege and pain, still shapes the Indian Ocean world. Zanzibar's beauty sells postcard, its past sells silence. Yet, beneath every grain of sand, beneath every coral wall, lies evidence of an age when men traded men and called it destiny. If you stand on the shore at dusk, when the sun sinks behind the dull sails, the sea seems to breathe. It whispers the names of those who were never buried. It hums with the rhythm of paddles and chains. It carries stories across centuries, stories the world would rather forget. They say the sea never forgets, and perhaps it is right, because even if men forget, the waves still tell the truth. The truth that the same waters that carried slaves to their sufferings now carry tourists to their leisure. The truth that the same sun that once burned upon chains now glitters on gold jewelry sold in the market. The truth that history is not past, it is present, disguised as paradise. The story of Zanzibar's slave market is not merely a story of cruelty. It is a mirror. It shows how desire, greed, and fate can intertwine to justify the unthinkable. How entire economies can be built on pain, and how those economies can still echo in the prices of our modern luxuries. But it also shows how remembrance can redeem, how a place once cursed by bondage can become a shrine of conscience, how in acknowledging our darkness, we begin to reclaim our light. Zanzibar remains the dark spice isle, not because of its past alone, but because of what it teaches the present. That freedom is not a moment, but a memory we must keep alive. That justice, like the tide, is slow, but inevitable. And that the sea, vast, patient, and eternal, still remembers everything.